All right, welcome. This is the Silicon Valley Podcast. I am Kent Lindstrom. My guest today, fan favorite, Michael White. How are you doing?
The fan of this podcast considers me a favorite.
This is hey, people are listening. They're listening all over the world too.
Ooh.
We have to keep that. Well, this is the Something Venture podcast, and this is the podcast in which I explore the reality behind the Silicon Valley headlines as I sit down with the people who are shaping the way we view the world online and beyond. And
this podcast is a break from that.
yeah. Well, last week we did, or last podcast, we did, it was transgender kids in Silicon Valley. And based on the Apple popularity ranking, which is a black box like everything from Apple, it was the most popular podcast, or one of, you can't tell because there's no number. It's just Apple magic. But it was one of the most popular podcasts we've had.
I don't doubt it. It's a provocative subject, but it's also an educational subject because
it was one of the ones where I went most from being a dick about it, like transgender is like not a real thing, right? To like, oh shit, it's like it's a real thing, and
right,
you're being a dick about it. But yeah, it was pretty good.
It's probably one of the few subjects that people still really don't know anything about.
Yeah.
That's what was for me. That was educational about the subject. Was
wow,
really?
Yeah, I was I kind of came to it like Archie Bunker. Like, what? They're offended by that? That doesn't seem offensive.
That's right.
Like they are bad drivers.
Wait a second.
I should learn that Mark Maron running start.
Yeah.
So the Mark Maron podcast in which he like tricks people. He starts talking and then
right. You're just talking, and then someone eventually goes, and then are we recording?
But he edits the podcast, or he does a little bit of cutting.
Well, that's the thing. You'd have to then just record a long period of casual conversation and decide when the right time to pick it up is.
Yeah, I don't want to get into the whole editing thing. You know, he's coming up on the big podcast, by the way, of Lorne Michaels.
Oh, that's right.
I've been getting
Lorne
that
Michaels.
podcast. I mean, Mark Maron's fantastic, but I just feel like he's talked to so many people that now, there's a lot of names on there I do not recognize on his podcast.
Oh, weekly,
like the drummer from
exactly.
like Fugazi or whatever,
some punk band from the '80s. That, I mean, it has a colorful story to tell, no doubt. But
but music. I mean, that's one of the things I've realized about doing this podcast is that Mark Maron's natural advantage is he has a bunch of comedians,
right,
or had who stand up on stage every night and have to entertain people for a living.
Well, look at the list of most successful podcasts in America, and most of them are either comedians or former comedians that are doing them.
Yeah, that's right, and I totally get why now.
Right,
because when I have a Silicon Valley person on, they're great, but they're not generally trained in entertaining people.
True.
They don't have some interesting heroin problem to talk about.
That's right.
So I didn't quite.
That's certainly the key to Maron's podcast. It's a built-in well of stories from the time he was taking drugs.
Yeah, though sometimes
at rock bottom.
Although he talked to who did he talk to? Oh, the young Saturday Night Live guys who were all like completely well-adjusted and no drug.
Oh, totally.
So Will Hader's like, oh no, good
Grew
child.
up with two parents.
Yeah, it was nice. Dog died when I was young. That was about it. No, I gotta drink some wine sometimes.
That's right. Never had a drug problem.
Yeah, he ruined it. But
damn millennials.
But the Lorne Michaels episode is coming up on.
I have actually slacked off of listening to Maron's podcast, and I now admit to checking who the guest is.
Oh, I do that
before
too.
I even bother.
That's all podcasts.
Yeah. But I used to more religiously listen to it because it was interesting regardless of who the guest was.
Yeah.
I think he's hit his stride now where you've heard all the stories that he has to tell.
Yeah. Well, and he now he works out his, I don't want to talk about the Mark Maron podcast, but he works out he works out material on his podcast now.
We'll edit this out.
And I don't think he's, I did anything. That's fascinating. That I don't think he's that funny a guy like his stand up. So when he's got 10, 15 minutes of him trying to work something out. I'm like, oh man, get to like the, whoever you got on, like Rick Rubin or whatever it is.
The genius thing about podcasting has always been that self whatever he does at the beginning of his podcast was actually the cornerstone for his initial audience, because his audience ate that stuff up.
Yeah.
His particular brand of fan, comedic fan, when he goes and does shows on the road, they're people who love that stuff.
Yeah.
All that, sort of, existential crisis stuff that he goes through. He has a legion of fans that go to his stand-up shows to hear that. And so that actually built his podcast.
Yeah.
Because, he's told the story a lot about how he's just working stuff out, but people were listening because he has fans that love that stuff.
Yeah.
Whereas most people who came to it later thought, what is he doing for 10 minutes while I'm waiting for, the drummer from...
I'm still shocked by podcast. Like the number of people who don't really know about. I was talking to somebody who really likes podcasts, and they hadn't. You know what 99% Invisible is?
Actually, you told me about it last week, and I haven't heard it yet.
I can't believe people haven't heard of it. It's like
I
listen
hadn't
to
before you
99%
told me.
Invisible. Roman Mars is fantastic.
I can't wait to hear it. I hadn't heard it before you told me about it.
Anyway, we turn our attention now to sports.
Yay.
Silicon Valley and sports.
And if you're going to talk about sports, why not bring on somebody who doesn't in any way have any contact with professional sports?
Yeah. Well, that's all.
me.
That's all of talk radio. That's all of sports talk radio.
That's exactly right.
It's my sports talk radio. I love it. I really enjoy sports talk radio. I don't know why. It's ridiculous. It's like an hour and a half of like who the second baseman should be.
Right.
A bunch
preposterous trade ideas.
Yeah,
Why don't we just trade for A-Rod and we'll give a couple of worthless minor leaguers?
Yeah, or a bunch of guys who like couldn't run, 40 feet, talking about how
That's
lazy
a given.
professional athletes are and like what bums they are.
Yeah. Actually, pop culture recommendation. If you ever get into a dark place about the people who call up sports talk radio, there's a great movie called Big Fan, starring Patton Oswalt.
Oh, I love that guy.
Oh yeah, he's terrific, and it is at the same time funny and painful because he's this guy who plays a dumpy, lives in his mother's basement, fan of sports talk radio. He writes down what he's going to say on a notepad before he calls, and it's truly a sad, a painful sort of look at who the person on the other end of those calls
the painful thing. I love here in the Bay Area. We have a guy named Gary Radnich who's very good at keeping the show moving.
Yes.
But these guys call up and they're just like obviously also not trained entertainers like so there's kind of 4 or 5 things I want to say. Okay, point number 1.
Right,
like if you look at like the 1970s, oh my god, you're like good at cutting those guys off.
No, there are not only are there nationally syndicated radio hosts who have made their name on people like that. Jim Rome, a very famous guy, used to work in Southern California, now nationally famous.
Right.
But there were callers into his show who went on to get their own show on sports talk radio.
Really?
Right.
That's funny.
There's a guy who you may hear syndicated like late night on some station called JT the Brick.
Okay.
Who used to be a caller to
funny.
Jim Rome's radio show.
You've got a passion for well, who's the guy? Like the Pharrell, the voice.
Pharrell, another key example of a guy who just sits there rolling through calls, just like the next nutbag on the phone gets to talk for 30 seconds.
The knowledge these guys have is unbelievable. It is funny to listen to people criticize the athlete, and I do too. But like, I went to
that's what sports is for.
Yeah, so I went to school at Northwestern, and in my fraternity was a guy who was on the football team. Like he had a scholarship. He was from Iowa, like the state of Iowa, and he was like a backup at Northwestern. So not the best college sport, like football program. When I went there, they were on the longest losing streak in Big Ten history. So he wasn't like in the top. He wasn't the top football. He was the best football player I have ever.
Right.
He could throw a ball farther, straighter, kill you by. And
he might have been the best football player at his school.
Yeah,
in high school.
Right. I'm sure he was. Oh my god. So that's the guy who's in the I don't know it's Big Ten still,
ends
but
up playing intramurals.
Oh
somewhere.
my god. Like the guys at the that right. It's like the theater thing, right? If you're not starring in your school play, you're probably not gonna. That's right. I guess theater you can go. It can go a little bit differently, but sports
sports is that's the other side of sports. I mean, the participatory side of sports is completely unknown to sports fans. They don't understand really what the numbers are and what the commitment level required is. What they see on the field, that's when they start understanding sports. They don't understand a guy who, he was the best player at his high school and, big man on campus, and then he goes to a third-rate Division I college and is the third string, guy, and
you see like the Giants, like Hunter Pence plays for the Giants, and you look at him, like, this seems like kind of a goofy, fun guy. It's like, well, he's probably one of the best athletes in the world,
right?
Like he can probably do things with a baseball that 100 other people in the world can do, or 200 or 300, but not a million.
Right. No, there's what is it now? There's probably a little north of 1,500 active Major League Baseball players.
Yeah, right.
40% of whom are pitchers. So, there's
Right.
probably less than 1,000 guys who can do what he does.
Yeah. So, and you're sitting there like, oh man,
He
that was
sucks.
ridiculous. Couldn't get that throw off in time.
It's true.
All right, so we have a hypothesis today, or thesis, or theory.
Thesis.
Again, do not want to end up in podcast court by misrepresenting
That's right.
whether we have a thesis or a theory. So should we?
It was a provocative question or statement.
Yeah. Well, let's state it. Let's say that.
Stated was it grew out of a conversation that arose after I think the Warriors won the championship last year.
The Warriors, the Bay Area based
That's right.
basketball team.
Golden State Warriors,
Yep.
which is a terrible name for a sports franchise, and hopefully changes their name back to San
Is
Francisco.
California even called the Golden State? Like,
Yes, it is. It's the Golden State.
what's
That's
the
our
land?
official
Isn't
state
it the land of
nickname.
milk and honey too?
No, that is I think Jerusalem, isn't it?
Oh, really?
I don't know. Israel
don't
is
know.
the land of milk and honey. I was raised Catholic. The hypothesis is someday all of the sports championships will be won by Silicon Valley teams. So
This is fabulous.
this is now a foregone conclusion.
And it's funny. So if you're listening to this and you're like not a big sports fan, you're still going to find this interesting. I actually came
I
to.
think so.
I was going to mention I came to sports, like watching sports, sort of later, and like you have kids who grew up like watching stuff, and they were like
Sure.
big, and I never really did that as a kid. Like my dad and mom weren't that into it, and then the sports I did was a collection of worthless later in life
Club
sports. Well, both so track and field,
Yeah.
not very useful. Then in college I rowed.
Efficiency.
Yeah.
Yeah, rowing, that's only good for the school you're going to.
And then I boxed like for a little bit. It
Boxing, that's good.
was great. But like, okay, so now as an adult, I can't, like, I don't watch those sports on
Right.
TV. So I don't have any, like, I really know what that guy's doing running the 440.
You could watch boxing if it weren't dead.
It kills me.
Yeah.
It was a lovely sport.
Exactly. It's
ridiculous.
Sweet science.
So I don't have that, like if you'd play football or something. And then like if you play basketball or tennis, you can play tennis when you're old. Like
It's true.
La Jolla High. La Jolla High, the golf team had unlimited access to the La Jolla Country Club
Right.
to practice. It's like a $50,000 a year club. Like, what? Don't do track and field. Like, do golf if you go to La Jolla.
Of course.
People, that's my parenting advice.
But I grew up playing golf. My dad loved golf and would watch golf on television.
Yeah,
And now at this point in my life,
yeah.
with I cannot imagine sitting down and watching a golf match on television.
Really?
I cannot.
I guess that's true. Oh, you did it when Tiger was.
What? Right. If there is something in the public consciousness, something sensational happening. Tiger, obviously, I guess I did watch one this last summer when Jordan Spieth was going for his like third major.
Oh yeah,
in a
there's a
row.
rivalry now, right? That we
Yeah.
should care about.
There's the British Open, and I did watch a bit of that. But I, as a regular sort of fan,
Yeah,
I just cannot imagine. I just, the as you were talking, sort of the personal connection to sports that you had when you were a kid.
Yeah.
It's so removed now from how we watch sports. We're in the sort of post-participation fandom
Yeah.
where people probably watch football more because they play fantasy football than because they played football when they were a kid.
right.
And baseball, rotisserie baseball, I'm sure is a big reason. Or, the social aspect of their friends or family attending games or going is probably much more causing them to go to a game or watch a game than the fact that they played it all their life and they love the sport. I think people are like one step removed from the sport.
Right.
Whereas our parents grew up, well, if you played baseball all your life, you were a lifelong baseball fan and you
Yeah.
keep score at the game and
Right.
you
yeah,
bring
you-
your
so-
glove.
Right. So you did the whole package. You played
Right.
Little League.
Right,
You
exactly.
followed some team like Pittsburgh or wherever. Although one of the things I found having moved from San Diego then to Chicago back here is if you live somewhere, and this is with respect to baseball,
Mhm.
you really should be a fan of the local team. Like you should let go your fucking childhood. Like you grew up in Pittsburgh, you haven't been there for 32 years,
Right.
and you're a Pirates fan because it's stupid. Like you're not gonna. They're not gonna be on the radio. Your kid's not gonna be a Pirates fan. You're not gonna get invited. I have a friend who moved from San Diego to L.A. and there's a huge rivalry between the Padres and the Dodgers, and everyone in the Dodgers. He's a Dodgers fan now, and I was like, how can you, whatever? And he's like, dude, I live here. My kids are gonna be Dodgers fans. I'm gonna get free tickets to Dodgers games. Like, I can let go the thing that I loved when I was 12, along with the other things I loved when I was 12. So
I am not quite on that bandwagon. I partially agree with you. I believe that if you live in a city that you didn't grow up in and you didn't grow up rooting for that team, you still should root for the team in the city you live in.
Yeah.
You should not be this guy who doesn't root for the San Francisco Giants, even though he lives in San Francisco because he grew up a Cubs fan.
yeah,
But I still think you can be allowed to be a Cubs fan as well.
that's right.
And
I still,
when the Cubs come to town, you can root for the Cubs.
Yeah.
And you can have the, what is it, Major League Baseball extra innings package where you get to watch Cubs games, on your home television in California. There's nothing wrong with that. But I still think you should support the local team.
well, in football, you can pull it off. By the way, one of the great pleasures I don't really commute anymore, but when I drove and listened to baseball on the radio,
Oh, yeah.
it's just lovely.
Oh, yeah.
Like, it's just such I don't know why.
Meditative.
Baseball is a sport where you probably have the biggest ratio of people who, like, if they're not into baseball, like, make the most fun of it. Like, nothing happens, and a bunch of people sitting around. And it's true. Sometimes when you're listening to baseball on the radio, there's a couple moments you don't hear anything. It's just some crowd noises,
Right.
and and that's that. But it's just lovely.
Well, it's always been ironic that people who are proponents of basketball or football make fun of baseball for its boredom and lack of action, when you can't argue with basketball. It is a constant activity sport,
right?
and I think that's to its detriment sometimes.
Yeah, which may or may not be interesting.
Right. But the ironic fact has always been that in an NFL football game, there is somewhere between 9 and 11 minutes of actual football action in a 60-minute game or in a 3-hour broadcast. Which it's always been ironic that that's what football fans would say about baseball is it's boring or there's not enough action. Well, there's hardly any action in a football game.
Right.
Most of it is guys milling around between downs or in a huddle. They have to play replays to keep you interested.
It's more of a chess game, right?
It is. It's a strategic game. There's
move.
There's plenty of intellectual, interest in football. It's just that people who decry baseball for its lack of action and say football is much better, it's like, well, if you think about it, there's so little actual action in a football game where the ball is in play that when you compare it to a baseball game, it's a multiple of time that the ball is in play. In a baseball game, because pitches are thrown all the time and balls are put in play, people are running the bases far more than in a football game when the clock continues to run while people are standing around talking, and when between the snap of the ball and the whistle is a very small amount of time in football.
That's true.
It's about, in a fast-paced football game, it's about 80 plays, and each of those plays averages probably about 7 or 8 seconds. And so, the actual action in a football game is pretty low. Anyway, we're getting way off topic.
Yeah. Well, we're keeping to the sports.
Has nothing to do with Silicon Valley and why all of the championships someday will be won by Silicon Valley.
Yeah, so why don't we talk about why that is? We want to establish why you should be interested in sports, even if you're not. Although you should be, if you live in a city, if you live in San Francisco or in Silicon Valley, and some teams are doing well, it seems like you should generally be oriented to that and know what's going on. Like, it shouldn't be the World Series and you just don't know that it's going on. In the same sense, if you were in Spain and the local soccer club or the local whatever bull riding club, I don't know, whatever they do, was doing like a big event, you'd know about it. You'd want to go experience it.
Sure.
So in your hometown,
well, if you live in
something big's happening, like
you live in Iowa in an area known for growing, butternut squash, you'll be interested in the butternut squash harvest that year, and you'll want to go to the butternut squash festival every year. But it's obviously My pseudo intellectual statement when I was in college always used to be, Karl Marx said that religion is the opiate of the masses. Well, in America, sports is the opiate of the masses. But while that might be true,
We need our opiates.
we need our opiates,
Come on.
and
Life's
whatever
tough.
whatever your opiate is, every society has one, and you've got,
Yeah.
it's your community. Participate in your community. A lot of people say, "Well, I'd rather go to the ballet or the theater, or
which is
whatever."
also fine.
Great, that's terrific. But when the majority of your area, your community, is thinking about a particular thing or talking about a particular thing, you should participate. You should know what's going
If
on.
nothing else, because I do remember the World Series was won by San Francisco last year. Was that it?
1 year ago.
Yeah, 1 year ago. And
No longer the world champs.
and so the town went nuts,
Right.
with like partying and celebrating and honking of horns. And I walked by like a bar and people were sitting outside, like the game wasn't on. They're like, "What's going on?"
Right.
Like, so something's gone wrong. Like,
Right.
It's like, really, you're that out of your community that you don't even notice that, a team that a bunch of people care about has just won like the World Series.
Well, that's why I think sports is different now. A lot of people used to willfully be against sports because sports were followed by people who grew up playing them. And so being a fan of a sport used to be a competitive endeavor in itself. People would try and one-up each other about how much they knew about the sport and deride their friends about how little they knew. And so an outsider would think, I don't want to be made fun of because I want to go to the parade.
Right.
Like, I don't know anything about this team. But now I don't think that's the case. I think that it's okay to not know anything about the team that just won the championship and just wear their T-shirt and go to the parade and have fun with everybody, or just watch the playoffs.
that's true.
You don't have to have watched every game.
And
that
as a social phenomenon, so one of the things that happens, like, if people know that I enjoy the local baseball team, the Giants, they invite me to these lovely events. And if I was like, baseball's stupid, I don't like it, like, I wouldn't be invited to these events.
because it's a community.
And I think as we head toward there being a lot of money in sports now, it's one of the last kind of time-specific pieces of entertainment.
Right. They're events.
You can DVR a sports event. I can't.
No.
Like, it just kills me knowing that the result happened already.
Well, like you were saying, you went to Northwestern. If you want to DVR the Northwestern game,
Nobody spoils that. Nobody tells you, like,
exactly. Then you can watch it in the privacy of your home because that's something you're interested in. But you're right; they are events, and that's why, by the way, the NFL is much more popular than baseball these days in the sort of zeitgeist, is because it's an event sport. It's Sunday, it's Monday night, now it's Thursday night. But that's the thing. That's why I say we are one step more abstracted from sports. And that's a good thing. A lot of people would say, "Oh, it's a bad thing. People don't know as much about the game, and they focus on fantasy stats rather than the team who wins and who loses." And great, those are all valid points. But the idea is they've been abstracted to a level where anyone can be a fan now, and there isn't this, well, you need to be a true blue fan, or else we're going to ostracize you or make you feel bad about being a fan. And you can be a casual fan. You can say, I don't know any of the names of the 49ers. I don't know any of the names of the Warriors except Steph Curry because he's on a shoe commercial. And that's okay. There's nothing wrong with that. And the sports teams are happy to have your money.
Yeah.
They're not turning your money away.
And so they've turned into enormously successful businesses, enormous amounts of money.
Right.
Gambling on them is an enormous business.
Absolutely.
FanDuel and DraftKings are now somehow emerged in the last couple of years as two big businesses.
Jury is out on whether they will survive because
because they're illegal.
Yeah. There is the little thing about gambling and how that slipped through the cracks. I'm not really sure.
Like, other than that. So here in Silicon Valley, Silicon Valley has created, aside from Wall Street and industrialists, like steel guys, has created enormous wealth.
Right.
And one of the assets you buy with your enormous wealth has always been a sports team.
Of course. Well, first you buy a winery in Napa.
That's right. You buy the winery in Napa.
And then you invest in a sports team.
Which doesn't cost anything like a sports team.
No, but most of the guys in Silicon Valley who have invested in sports, they're not primary owners, they're part owners. They basically invest their millions the way historically the Jerry Joneses and the Bob Crafts of the world invested their billions, which is, I just want to participate. I just want to be a part owner. You know, when you're a venture capitalist and you've retired and you already bought your winery in Napa and now you want to buy a part of a sports team,
Right.
what are you really getting out of it? You're getting to be called an owner,
Yep.
get to go sit in the owner's box
Yep.
during the games. Probably get special access to players and games and
Yep.
travel and whatever. And that's great. There's nothing wrong with that. And also that means that sports management becomes almost as much of a sport as the
Right.
game on the field. We talk about the abstraction of sports now,
Right.
people being removed from the playing of the game. Well, now with fantasy sports, so many people talk about how teams are managed. And now with the participation of people we know or
Yep.
names we know in ownership, now we talk about how the businesses are managed. And,
Right.
People are sometimes who are fans of these teams know as much about the owners and the business goings on and partnerships as they do about the players on the field. And there's nothing wrong with that.
Well, there's always been a weird, I guess this varies by sport. So, I mean, one way that in Silicon Valley, we've got a baseball team, we have a basketball team.
Well, technically, we have two baseball teams. Well, Silicon Valley, we're going to expand that to the Bay Area.
Okay, so so we have two baseball teams and two football teams, one in Oakland, one in.
So going back to the premise, here are the ground rules of the premise.
Yeah.
First of all, we have 6 teams. We have 2 baseball teams.
Uh-huh.
We have 2 football teams, Oakland and San Francisco. We have a hockey team
Yep.
in San Jose, and we have a Warriors basketball team in Oakland, soon to be in San Francisco. Okay. However, we have to throw 2 out.
Oh boy.
Because this is a Silicon Valley podcast, and we're gonna adhere to the premise that this should be interesting to people who are not sports fans.
Yep.
You can't look at a football team the same way you look at, say, a basketball team, because the NFL is much more of a monolithic business. Football teams, the Niners and the Raiders, have different decision matrices that they go through. They have a salary cap that's very strict.
Yeah.
They have no individual television contracts that they can make revenue off of. It's
Yeah.
all through the league, and their marketing is all through the league as well. There are fewer ways to make decisions to make your team a success off the field than, say, a basketball team or a baseball team.
And so the salary cap issue is that the New York team doesn't have like $100 million worth of talent,
Right.
and the Indianapolis team has $2 million. So the New York team, obviously,
Right.
which you get a little bit in baseball.
Right. As a matter of fact, you could say, to sort of broach our thesis again, is that the Silicon Valley ethic or the Silicon Valley management style, you could say that back in the non-salary cap, non-revenue sharing days of the NFL, Eddie DeBartolo was the first Silicon Valley owner of a football team.
He was the owner of the
Right. He was the Niners owner.
49ers. Yeah.
He bought the team around 78, 79. Got him into the Super Bowl by 82.
Yep.
When we talk about Silicon Valley, and this to go back to our conversation that spawned this topic, what we're talking about and what we were talking about at the time is, Joe Lacob and Peter Guber, who bought the Warriors a few years ago now.
Yeah. And Joe Lacob, venture capitalist at Kleiner Perkins.
Kleiner for
and a self-made guy.
30 years, I think he's been at Kleiner almost.
Yeah, really rich guy. And then Peter Guber is the Hollywood producer.
Hollywood producer back to the 70s.
Yeah.
One of the biggest movies you've
Like
ever
Top
heard
Gun
of.
was a Guber thing, right?
Yep.
I
I think Terminator might have been as
Oh,
well. Mandalay Entertainment is his company.
Yep.
But they were sort of they're the only so far ownership group that has overtly said, we are running our team like a Silicon Valley company.
Mm-hmm.
But going back to why you can't use football and, because of their limitations, well, before all those limitations, before the salary cap, before even free agency as we know it hit football, Eddie DeBartolo bought the Niners. He came out of real estate. His family, the DeBartolos, they're from Columbus, Ohio, or York, or another town in Ohio that his father basically was a real estate developer that essentially pioneered the mini mall.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, that's where their family money came from. Well, Eddie DeBartolo came out to California and wanted to buy the team. His father was a billionaire and he was a millionaire, and he ran his team pretty much the way a venture capitalist would.
Interesting.
He had huge goals that the sort of when we talk about, well, what does that mean? Silicon Valley, smart business people are in every business, not just in Silicon Valley. Well, it is this sort of ethic of you find good ideas no matter where they come from. You seek out best practices no matter who they come from, and you continually try to upgrade them. You take big risks, you go for big rewards, and you try and do it quickly.
Yeah.
Those are things that I think you can say are unique to Silicon Valley. I think it comes from our boom bust sort of economy and the fact that a real estate developer can stand to watch an investment or a business mature over years, but in Silicon Valley, that's not how we think. We're much more aggressive in our decision making than that. And so I think if you define it that way, you look at Eddie DeBartolo in the late 70s and early 80s, comes out here, he invests a bunch of money in the team, but not just on the field. Of course he did, you're in the draft, you have to draft players you can only trade for so many players. They didn't have free agency in football. Right. And so the only time you could add players was when somebody essentially got cut by their team.
Yeah.
So he would spend big dollars on veterans who would still have a couple good years left, but were making too much money for their team and got cut. And, would pay his people, huge salaries. He would stock up on high-priced backups. I mean, it used to be said that when the Niners were in their heyday in the 80s, that their B team could beat just about any other team in football. He, when they won Super Bowls, he would fly the entire organization to Hawaii and they would hand out their Super Bowl rings with, the families and everything in Hawaii. He overspent on their team and he built a winning organization. Yeah. He was super aggressive.
And by the way, how much did he pay for that team? Like $100, $200 million investment?
Oh, it was less than that. He probably bought it for about $8 million.
Right.
This was like 1978.
Right, but today they're worth what?
Family still owns a team, so it's hard to tell. You look at Forbes, because they have a stadium now, they're worth north of $1 billion.
Yeah. So, All right. Why don't we pause right there for the week? That's Michael White talking about his controversial topic that one city is going to rule them all, one area is going to rule them all sports. It's going to be the Bay Area. See how this one ends next time. Thank you for listening. This has been the Something Venture podcast with Michael White. I'm Kent Lindstrom. I'm your host. Thanks for listening.